All right, so this is the People Who Live Here podcast. My name is, of course, Mal, and I'm here with Bob Joseph, a local news reporter. I'm glad to have him on. He was highly requested. 5 people reached out to me, and they wanted you on.
I'm pleased to hear that.
Yeah, so you're a highly requested guest. Did you grow up here?
I did. I was born in Binghamton, and I grew up in Endwell and Endicott. So where we are right now at a coffee shop on East Main Street in Endwell, this is not far from where I grew up. I went to school down the street, just a few blocks down the street, where the closed McDonald's restaurant is. That used to be a place called Hooper School. So that's where I went for grades 1 through 4. This was school just a few blocks to the east of where we are now.
When did they tear that down?
Believe it was in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It closed as a school, I believe, in around 1970, and for quite a while it was used by the town of Union. Town of Union owned it and used it as an office building. For a time, the state police had their Endwell station in the school, the first area, office area of the old school. And for a while, WSKG TV had its studios.
Really?
And sometimes they used to do their 10 o'clock report from the school, and because it's so close to the railroad track, sometimes you'd hear a train come rumbling through during the 10 o'clock report. You'd hear the train whistle and then the rumbling of a 200-car freight train for about 1.5 minutes.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I didn't know there was a school down here.
There was.
I'm new to Endwell. I live right off of Hooper Road. And I'm new to Endwell. I just moved here about October. But I'm from Binghamton. I'm a South Sider. I grew up right off Conklin Ave.
So you're familiar with the Triple Cities.
Very.
Yeah.
Yeah, I left the area multiple times. Like, I've lived in Illinois, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, California, Georgia. And I also had a stint where I was overseas for 3 years. And I came back because I love this area. I'm a big fan of this area, and like I take a lot of pride in being from here, which is where the podcast comes into play. Is like I started this to like highlight interesting and unique people and uplift the community a little bit by getting to know these people. But I love this area, and like I'm never leaving. Like I'm staying here.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm hearing from, I think, more and more people over the last few years, people who in the past might have decided, there must be better opportunities anywhere else but the Triple Cities. Well, there are always opportunities when you look elsewhere, but there's still plenty of opportunities here for people of all ages.
Yeah, manufacturing specifically. You got a few manufacturing places here. I was a welder for about 4 years, and I worked in a manufacturing plant. And that was like, the pay was great. And it was right over on Bevere Street over in Binghamton is where I was working at. But I've lived Binghamton most of my life on the south side.
And I see more manufacturing opportunities coming in the next 5 or 10 years. There should be a lot of potential development just to the west here, just down the street, down North Street at the Huron campus, because they demolished the 5 old huge IBM buildings last year. They're working to get that, I think it's a 10-acre site, shovel ready, and they're pitching that property to at least a few potential manufacturers. So I would hope to see some real new development and new jobs over at that site in the next 2 or 3 years.
Do you know like what kind of is it going to be like chips? Because I know the whole chip thing right now is hot.
It probably won't be chips because chip manufacturing really needs, I think, more space, more power, and just has to be done at a larger scale. I mean, that's what Micron is doing north of Syracuse. They're putting in a gigafactory. And one of the biggest challenges they face is having enough power for it. They have the land available, but the power they need for the project they're talking about doesn't exist right now. And that's also going to be a problem here in Endicott. We don't have the available generating capacity that a lot of companies might need looking ahead for the next 10 or 20 years. So NYSEG or other companies, generating utilities will have to step up to make sure that we have the power we need, whether it's for Endicott or elsewhere in Broome County.
See, I didn't know that. I didn't even know that was an issue.
It is.
So how do you, like, when you've been a reporter for years at this point, when it comes to things like finding out about like generating power and stuff like that, how do you find that?
Just talk to a lot of people. One of the people I have on the program, our radio program, at least once a month is the county executive. And he has brought this issue up with respect to future development in Broome County. The power that we have currently available limits a lot of potential businesses from considering locating a big operation here. So he's mentioned that. The woman who's in charge of the Broome County IDA, she's mentioned that we have really serious power needs. And it's not unique to the southern tier. It's all across New York State and all across the country because so many of the new high-tech companies need enormous amounts of power for almost anything they plan to do. And that means that going forward, that's why there's even talk now potentially of having a nuclear generating plant, a small nuclear plant, even here in Broome County. People are shocked to hear it. Well, nuclear is going to be part of New York State's future, whether it happens, say, in the Binghamton area or elsewhere in the state. It might not be suited in the Binghamton area because you still need a fair amount of water to cool a nuclear generating facility, even with the new technology.
Yeah, and I mean, we got the Susquehanna right there for it, too.
Yeah, but the quantity of water in the Susquehanna over the course of a year may not be enough because take a look sometimes in the summer how shallow the water gets. Say if we get a prolonged dry period, sort of a drought, it might not be sufficient to have the water needed to properly cool a nuclear facility. So I'm not sure if that's something that's feasible, that if through some sort of technology, setting up a dam or something like that, if they would have enough water, but it is something that I think will be considered.
Yeah. Do you know about any like future projects happening here in Binghamton? Like anything that you're excited about?
Well, there still is talk about the tech complex that the IDA has been working to develop near the airport. Part of it's in the town of Maine, and part of it is in the town of Union. Still unclear if that's going to move forward. There's legal action. The town of Maine is taking legal action, and that could slow the development. So it's not a sure thing. So it's a lot of effort, a lot of time and money has been spent so far in trying to develop that project. But to me, it's unclear if it's going to become a reality. So that's one of the highest profile projects. Then again, you've got other stuff that could potentially be developed at the Huron campus. You have space available to our east down Main Street in Westover, where BAE Systems had been at used to be the Air Force. It was called Air Force Plant 59, and then they tore it down after it was damaged by the flooding that happened in September 2011. But that space is available, and soon you will see, like probably in the next 3 to 6 months, they're going to be raising the level of that site at 600 Main Street, so it'll be more flood resistant. So let's say about half that site will be elevated by 10 to 12 feet, so it might be more attractive for some future development.
Yeah, I know there's the flood wall over on near like Court Street. There's that flood wall. There's like Peak Logics is right there on the corner, and then there's the
at the sharp curve thing.
Yeah. Do you know like that flood wall looks like it's not sturdy. Like you drive by it, there's cracks all in it. Like
It's an old structure, and
yeah,
over the last 2 or 3 years, a fair amount of work has been done to improve the structural integrity. The State Office of General Services just wrapped up a project there to improve that flood wall from near that building out toward the Tompkins Street Bridge. So they were busy doing work over the last 2 or 3 construction seasons. So I think it's in better shape, much better shape than it was. But as far as if we have another flood similar to what we had in 2011, I don't know about the ability of that structure to protect that part of Binghamton. I'm not sure. I'm not an engineer, but I would have some concerns.
yeah, it looks very unsafe. Like it looks like there's cracks all in it, and like it's very concerning to drive by because like I was not only did we have that flood in 2011, but we had a flood a few years prior to that as well. And I had a friend who was on this podcast, and he's from the Czech Republic, and he was like, "Yeah, it seems like nothing like catastrophic ever happens here in Binghamton." And I was like, "We had a nasty flood. The house was floating down the river.
Oh yeah,
Like it was a nasty flood." And I don't know. The likelihood of like something like that happening again, especially with like climate change and everything, is like, I wouldn't put it out of the question.
no, it's the reality is, given the location at the confluence of 2 rivers at the Shenango and Susquehanna confluence, future flooding disasters are virtually certain. It's a question of how serious will they be? Will they be as bad as 2011? Will they be bad as some of the flooding that happened in 2006? It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell because each case is unique. And sometimes we saw for the one flood event where there was a lot of damage on that portion of Upper Court Street on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
Not only Court Street, but some of the side streets had a lot of damage, and yet other parts of the Triple Cities didn't have much damage at all. So there are so many factors that come into play with every flood event. So I think we do have to keep aware, I mean, from a disaster preparedness standpoint, and in an effort to make sure that we invest the money that's needed to improve these structures, because whether it's that flood wall or other flood walls, say like the flood wall along Front Street in Binghamton's First Ward, in that area around Red Oak Restaurant, going from the highway exit near Prospect Street down to Front Street, that's also vulnerable. And, I really think that more federal money ultimately needs to be spent to improve these flood protection structures in our community.
And talking about local politics, because I'll get into local politics because local politics has to do with Binghamton. Do you think that the current mayor and his administration is doing a good job with things like the flood wall or like thinking about things like that?
Well, I think they're doing about all they can right now, given the financial constraints. So Jared Cram spent, I think, a fair amount of his time during his first 4-year term trying to pay attention to these issues, whether it's with the flood walls, or even one of the things he was especially pleased with was getting attention from the railroads to getting some of the railroad bridges that were in such sorry shape, getting them repaired. And so several of the overpasses in Binghamton that are the responsibility of Norfolk Southern Railroad, several have been fixed, and I think at least a couple more are expected to be fixed. So those are infrastructure things that are really expensive, and they need attention. They're not sexy, but they need attention. Same with like the parking garage downtown that was just closed. The State Street parking garage was closed on January 5th, and the structure had been in use for 55 years. They just couldn't keep it open any longer because it had outlived its useful life. And so what you'll see in the months ahead is the city will spend a substantial amount of money to have that demolished. I don't know if it's going to cost a couple $1,000,000, but it's going to be a costly and time-consuming project to tear down the parking garage. That could no longer be, it was no longer sustainable. They could spend more money to keep it open, but it wouldn't be a wise investment.
Yeah, and I know they just built a parking garage, like a small parking garage over near Boscov's,
Yeah.
where the liquor store is at, that same street over in downtown. Because I park there when I go to Black Bear games.
Yeah, and it has about 500 spaces. It's not as big as the old parking garages. The spaces, some are appropriately sized for a regular vehicle, but a lot are smaller spaces designed for compact cars. So it's not as much space to play around in that garage compared to the one that used to be there. Because that garage, the original Water Street garage was torn down, I think, 3 or 4 years ago because that was in terrible shape. I mean, you could see there was like a main structural beam, and it was in dire condition, and they had to keep monitoring on a regular basis the parking garage condition for falling chunks of concrete and other structural issues. And finally, they shut it down, tore it down, and then built this new, somewhat smaller garage. So, and then you also have the garage at 7 Hawley Street that was opened, let's say maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So we have 2 remaining city-operated garages downtown. The mayor says that's enough for now, although some people who work downtown or some students who live downtown think there's still a need for another garage or more parking options. So we'll see what happens over the next few years.
Yeah, and downtown is growing too.
It is.
It's a growing thing. You got a lot of like hot restaurants coming up. Like Portside is pretty popular.
And you're going to see more. I've got stories that I'm working on. There'll be new restaurants opening downtown in the next 3 to 6 months. So new entities are constantly popping up. And occasionally some restaurants will close. I mean, that's part of the natural business cycle. I mean, some places will be popular right away and some won't. It's a tough competitive business. But the good news is it gives people, whether it's those who live here in the Triple Cities or work downtown, or for the students, gives people lots of new choices to explore. And the ones who do a good job and find the right niche, they'll be successful.
Yeah, and like I know that a couple of years ago too, I think like 2021, 2022, there were those like allegations that came out against those restaurant owners, and that shocked the city. Like that rocked the city. And those guys eventually ended up having to close their restaurants because they just weren't bringing the business. There was, somebody left a dead turkey on one of the doorsteps.
Yeah, it was a really sad time for 3 restaurants downtown because there were overlapping ownership groups, and for several weeks they were adversely affected, even though there never was any official announcement about a police investigation. But so much was circulating on social media that it had an impact. It had an impact on their business, even had an impact where one weekend there was a huge rally and demonstration downtown where hundreds of people showed up on Court Street to express their concern about the allegations that were being circulated.
Yep, I was there.
Yeah.
I was there. I'm a photographer. So I go to a lot of local events and I photograph events. Like I did a whole shoot at like Pride and everything like that. And protest and stuff, I tend to go and I take pictures and I'll post them online and stuff like that. And I was at that protest and you could really, like at that protest, I don't know if you were there, but you could really like feel the emotion of what was going on at that time. You know what I mean? Because it was such a big deal when that happened. Like it rocked the city.
Well, it rocked the city in large part because of all of the rumors and innuendo that that were circulating on social media. That showed the power of social media, how after a few people started circulating the allegations, and then more and more people heard about them, and more people were becoming suspicious because for an extended period, there never was an official statement put out by Binghamton Police or the district attorney's office about whether or not there really was an investigation. Finally, after the stories were circulating, finally the police did put out a news release saying that they were investigating. But a lot of people were just, they didn't trust the authorities because so much was circulating, and then there was no official information for a long time. And so people were wondering if these allegations were going to be taken seriously. And ultimately, there was an investigation, and ultimately some people wound up being charged. But the interesting thing is, a lot of the people who were affiliated with those restaurants had absolutely nothing to do with any of the allegations. They were part of the ownership group, and there were a lot of people who wound up being hurt, and businesses that were doing really, really good business and had been for like the last few years ultimately were shut down, even though the allegations for a long time, nothing had been proven. So it shows that even if people start posting things online, which may or may not be true, it can have a powerful impact on downtown Binghamton. And even now, there still is the lingering fallout in that case years later.
And like so those three restaurants, I think it was Stone Fox, Dos Rios, and the Colonial. Those were like hot spots for students, especially the Colonial. That was like students were always at the Colonial. Like, I don't go out downtown. I don't drink, so I have no like reason to be down there. But I remember when I was drinking and I went out downtown, the Colonial was just filled with college students, like filled to the brim with college students, and same with Dos Rios. Dos Rios as well.
And so while those businesses may have been especially popular among students when they were in town, they still were very popular with local residents when the students weren't in town. Or even a lot of times when students were in town, you would see an interesting mix of local residents and Binghamton University students at all these places. I mean, they developed a following not just among students, but even among a lot of the people who live in the Triple Cities.
Yeah, and they like, I know that Courtside is pretty popular. They do a lot of sports stuff. Like I remember I went in there one time and they had the UFC fights on. Iron Agave is pretty popular as well. Those restaurants, they've replaced the other ones, but they're still just as popular. They're doing great business, and as far as I know, the ownership is great, which, by the way, I've heard rumors about like some business owners in this area that I won't get into, but I heard that they're pretty shady.
The problem though with rumors is, and rumors have always circulated, always, but I'd say especially over the last decade, a lot of people use social media, different websites to post their latest rumor, but there's no way to ascertain if something you see posted online is any truth to it, or if somebody is just making it up. I mean, a lot of people are irresponsible when they're in front of a keyboard and when they think they can be anonymous. And that's I think, the risk that if you're operating a business and say you have a competitor who doesn't like you, or even say in the past you've had a business partner that you didn't get along with, or whatever, or an employee who's no longer with you. If they have an axe to grind, they can go online and post virtually anything. It's very difficult for people who are subject to these rumors to respond. I mean, what can you do? see something like that online and say it's not true, well, who's going to believe it?
Yeah, and like I think the Colonial, those guys, they responded. I remember the response because they said like the allegations were like very serious, not something to take lightly. And their response was they just said we will not be victims of cancel culture. And I just thought to myself, I was like, that's like the worst thing you could say.
But
In that
there's
moment.
no good thing to say, in my
Yeah.
opinion. If you're accused of something, silence, if you remain silent, it's viewed by some people as an admission of guilt. If you respond, some people are going to say, well, of course, what do you expect them to say? They're not going to admit that they did anything wrong. So it seems to me when people are facing allegations, especially allegations by people who insist on being anonymous, it's basically a no-win situation.
Yeah.
Even if you hire somebody who's a damage control specialist, and you can try to hire a public relations firm and see if they can somehow navigate through something that's very unpleasant, but there's no right way or wrong way to respond to any kind of allegation, really,
Yeah.
especially these days.
Yeah, I know. Do you know, how did you get into this? So how did you get into reporting?
Well, I've always been interested in news, and going back to when I was in kindergarten. So we'll just say that's quite a while ago. And it was not the school that we talked about before, but another school here in Endwell called Homer Brink. That's where I went to kindergarten. And my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Blackwell, every day brought in a copy of the Sun Bulletin. That's when Binghamton had two papers. We had the Sun Bulletin in the morning and the Evening Press in the afternoon. My family got the Evening Press delivered to our home, so I was familiar with that paper. But the morning paper was new to me, and so my kindergarten teacher let me read the Sun Bulletin when I was in school, and she would let me take it home because I was so fascinated with this morning newspaper. It was a tabloid format, and I thought, this is great. And so I would read the stories that were in the Sun Bulletin to my mom. So I'd say even in kindergarten, I was auditioning to be doing radio
Yeah.
news. I was fascinated with the news. I was fascinated with radio. And so I would say at an extremely young age, I had a general idea of the sort of stuff that I wanted to do. And that all started in Endwell here, decades ago.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of similar. My parents were news junkies. Like when I was growing up, my parents have always been very politically involved. Like my entire life, like they've always been paying attention to the news. They're both Navy veterans, intelligence specialists, and they would read the newspaper while watching the news. So I learned to read by reading the headlines of the news. And like ever since, I've always been a very political person. Like I'm very politically involved here in Binghamton. I work with mutual aid groups. I have put together protests and stuff like that. I've always participated in them. And believe it or not, I'll tell you more about this after. But I'm running for mayor of Endicott. I'm going to run for mayor of Endicott.
Oh, really?
And I will tell you more about this off this podcast because I don't want to reveal anything
All
too.
right. Well, I'll just say, as I often say when I'm intrigued by something, stay tuned.
Exactly. Stay tuned. As the time gets closer, I'm trying to find a place that'll let me do town halls. I'm calling my political party the Freak Power Party. And I've got like a bunch of like policies already lined up. And yeah, I'm going to be running as an independent, which means I need 200 signatures from Endicott residents, which I don't think will be hard to get. You know what I mean? Especially with like what I'm planning on doing. But I'm not expecting to get into office.
But you never know.
Yeah.
You never know until you actually try whether it's running for mayor or village board or whatever, till you actually give it a shot, you don't know. And you might be successful or you might not be successful. Bottom line is, if you take it seriously, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn lessons, whether it's to be in politics in the future or just lessons that will apply to you as you live in our community.
Yeah. And like, I think that like my idea of like what I'm doing is like, do you know who Hunter S. Thompson is?
Yes.
So he ran for sheriff in Aspen, Colorado. And I was reading about that and I was like, wouldn't it be awesome if we brought something like that here to the Triple Cities? That was my idea. And I don't know, I was thinking about it and I was just like, I'm like, I'm gonna like run for mayor. Because I think it'd be funny. First
I encourage people to get involved. What I am concerned about in 2026 is some people don't want to be engaged. And
yes.
and I think they figure no matter where they look, everything is broken and everything is too overwhelming, that there's no hope to fix it. And if that's the attitude people have, people don't want to get involved and don't care enough about their community, go to meetings and to raise issues, then things aren't going to get better. We need people of all ages and from all backgrounds to get more involved and try to do things to make our community a better place. It can be done.
Yeah, and like I think here's like my deal is like I vote every election. I always vote every single time. Because I have been to I'm a Navy veteran. So I've been to 13 different countries. I have been to countries where people don't have the right to vote. I do not take my right to vote for granted. I believe in the power of the voice of the people. And when I meet people who are like, they don't want to take side on issues or, they don't want to get involved because it's too scary. I think to myself, I'm like, yeah, but how do you expect anything to change? Like I think it was Che Guevara said like, I have seen the caskets of those who did not want to be involved. And I think about that often because it's like, you want this community to be better, but you're not willing to put in the work to make it a better place. And like I said, I love this city. I love Binghamton. I love being from here. I take pride in being from Binghamton. And I don't see enough people that take pride in being from this area the way that I do. And that's something I'd like to change as well is like, I want people to, when they go to on a trip to Washington, D.C., I want them to say, I'm from Binghamton with pride. I want them to be able to say that. And that's just, that's just my take on it. But, I feel like we're lacking that unity in this community as well.
Well, I think one of the challenges right now, and it's not unique to Broome County, it's life in general. People are so busy. People are busy with their job responsibilities or family responsibilities, or if they're students, focusing on their education. There's a lot that everybody has to do and only a limited amount of time. And I think sometimes people ought to try to spend some time to reconsider their priorities. I mean, to try to fit in some time to get more involved in their community, even if it's not going to every village board meeting or every county legislature meeting, maybe every so often, or maybe trying to watch the meetings when they're streamed online so you at least have a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to the Endicott meeting on Monday tomorrow, and make it known that I'm running. That's the goal with going to that meeting. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like people talk a big game. You know what I mean? Like I see people that are not pleased with the way that things are going. but they're not willing to put in the effort or work to change that. And that's the problem is like, if you want something to change, you have to work for it. It's not going to change itself, and that's why I'm so politically involved. That's why I go to these protests. That's why I go to these rallies and take photographs. And because like, I want change. I want to see Binghamton become the community that I wish it would be, and that's the first step is getting out there.
And it can happen. One thing that I think is exciting is a person who grew up in Binghamton is now mayor of Seattle. So
I saw that.
Katie Wilson was just elected as a socialist Democrat as a mayor of Seattle, a huge city. And, and she also just had a chance to be at a parade after her city's team won a big football game. So it's like, and to think that she grew up on Binghamton's west side. She went to Binghamton High School. She graduated there not that many years ago. And so she was an activist in some ways, I think. If you look back at some of the news stories when she was growing up in Binghamton, I think in some ways it sounds like she was like you. She was very interested in making the community a better place. And then she wound up going to the Northwest. She got married, and so now she and her husband, and I think they have a couple of kids. So now she's mayor of Seattle. And who would have thunk that would be possible? But it happened.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Like that to me is a point of pride. Like I take, like being like, look at what this person from the Triple Cities has done. It's so impressive.
And Jared Graham, who also, I mean, look, Jared Graham was just a little bit over 30 years old when he was first elected mayor of Binghamton. He's the youngest mayor of Binghamton. He was just elected to a second term. He was on the program a couple days ago, and he said he was so excited to tell me that when he was in Washington for the National Conference of Mayors, he had a chance to meet Katie Wilson, who is mayor of Seattle. So the Binghamton mayor had a chance to speak with the Seattle mayor, and he said a lot of the questions she asked was, things about Binghamton. How are things going in Binghamton? So I thought that was fascinating that someone who certainly has her own set of challenges now as mayor of Seattle is still interested in her hometown.
You know what I used to do back when I was living in like North Carolina and South Carolina, and like I did a bit overseas in Japan for 3 years. For me, it was I used to religiously follow the Rumble Ponies games. Like I would religiously follow the Rumble Ponies games because when I felt like when the Rumble Ponies were doing good, I felt like everything at home was good. Like that was just, it was my way of being like, okay, things are going good.
Yeah.
It's simple, but
Well, that's a source of pride too, because for the longest time, the Binghamton area didn't have any baseball. We lost our minor league baseball team, the Triplets, the team that was affiliated with the Yankees. They played their final game in Johnson City in 1968 before the DOT came in and tore down their stadium to build Route 17. So from 1968 to 1992, we had no baseball in Binghamton. And then finally, and this shows how one person could make a difference, Juanita Crabb, who was mayor of Binghamton, really made it a priority for the city to have a stadium built. And she wasn't the only person that made it happen, but she was one of the key people that saw to it that the city of Binghamton now has a baseball stadium. So that's how we wound up getting AA baseball back in Binghamton in the early 90s, because the mayor at the time, as well as some other local officials and baseball fans, had a vision. And it shows that even though it was difficult, they made it a reality. And here we are 34 years later, and we still have a baseball team. It's no longer the B-Mets, it's the Rumble Ponies, but here we are just a few weeks away from a new season. and they're the defending champions, and it's
Yeah.
exciting.
When they changed their name to the Rumble Ponies, I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken because it's like, I always knew them as the Binghamton Mets. When I grew up, I'm a big Mets fan too. Like, obviously, I'm a big Mets fan, and I saw like David Wright go through the farm system, and watching him, and like he was very involved in the community when he was here. Like he was when I went to Benjamin Franklin Elementary, he used to show up all the time. Him and a few players from the team, they would show up, they would sign autographs, take pictures, like all this stuff. And to watch him go from the Binghamton Mets to like the third baseman of the New York Mets, oh my God, I was like, it was 2005, I think was his first season. I was 9 years old. I was like blown away. I was like, man, he played for Binghamton, and like I thought it was the coolest thing ever, you know. But when they changed their name, I was like, damn it, like because it felt like the area was changing without me. It felt like Binghamton was changing without me being there, and that really like kind of messed with me a little bit.
Well, I was disappointed, but it was still mostly a marketing scheme anyway. And John Hughes, who owned the club back then, got exactly what he wanted. Not only a lot of attention here in the Binghamton area, but national attention when they were having the name contest, Rumble Ponies and several other choices. It wound up getting coverage, I'm sure, on ESPN. And there was a big story in the New York Times about the Binghamton baseball team and its new name. So it's the type of thing, especially these days with minor league baseball, that's all part of the business. And as a lot of team owners admit, they make, in some cases, a huge amount of money selling merchandise, whether it's for the Rumble Ponies or the Savannah Bananas. I mean, merchandising is critical now for minor league sports teams.
Yeah.
And so, yes, as say a purist or a traditionalist, I do miss the name Binghamton Mets. I also understand why, from a marketing standpoint, that's exactly what the Binghamton baseball team needed at the time.
Well, there were four Mets teams. There's the New York Mets, there's the Binghamton Mets, the Syracuse Mets, and the Port Lucille Mets. So when I was talking to the owner at one of the games, because the owner tends to work the shop there, and I asked her about it, and she was like, "Yeah, she's like, it just didn't make sense to have four Mets teams, which makes
Well, and to be sure, it's when it comes to baseball organizations, there's so many layers to branding and things like that. I mean, it's complicated. It's the whole thing about the way teams are named and the way they're merchandised and promoted. It's very complicated, and it's even getting more complicated as the sports industry evolves. Nothing is simple anymore.
didn't they just sell the team recently too? Didn't the team just get sold?
I believe about 2 years ago, the David Sabatka, who had been the owner, sold to a company that owns dozens of minor league teams. So it's an interesting new era. The company that owns the Rumble Ponies owns other teams in the Eastern League.
Yeah.
It's a curiosity to me. I'm fascinated by it. I don't know that I fully understand it, but it's definitely it's not the type of situation that used to exist in minor league sports.
Yeah. So speaking of like change, right? What do you think, like, if somebody is listening to this and they're like, I've wanted to get involved for a while in the community, and like I wanted to get involved in like helping change the community, what do you think are the best steps somebody could take? Like just an average person.
Well, pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on, to the local news, whether it's WNBF or the TV stations or the newspaper, Press Connects. the Binghamton University newspaper. I mean, every available news source you should follow. And if you're really concerned, get involved in going to government meetings or community organizations. Find out from people what's going on in your neighborhood. Ask questions. Talk to people. The more engaged you are, the better you will be at seeing opportunities and maybe seeing needs that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that like a lot of younger people go to protests. But like I feel like people might be afraid to get involved sometimes because it's very like it's politics is such a divisive thing. Like
It is.
it separates people.
Well, it does. And you have to decide if you care about your community, you have to summon up the courage to actually get involved and to be willing to express your views about things. I mean, you can sit back and observe, but sitting back and just observing is not likely to be that helpful. If you have ideas about things that could be done better, then you should try to find a way to express yourself. Say at government meetings, at village board meetings or other meetings, if there's a public comment period, take advantage of it. First, you have to pay attention to the rules because usually you're allowed to speak for a set amount of time. It might be 3 minutes or 5 minutes, so pay attention to the rules. And when you express your opinion, try to do it in a way that makes sense, that is simple, and not necessarily confrontational. Because I think sometimes people say, I want change, and then they start making demands. Well, if you make demands, some people won't take you seriously right at the outset. But if you talk about your concerns and express them in a way that's not trying to start a big argument and just express areas that you think could be done better, people are likely to be more receptive.
Yeah, and I feel like so from my experience, like being involved in politics and stuff like that, um, I'm far left, and my parents are conservative. I talk to my parents about politics sometimes because they're very informed and they're very. My mom is a PhD, so she's very educated. Um, I talk to them about politics, and it's always respectful. Like we never name call or anything like that. But like the average person, like especially online, if you share an opinion, you're like gonna get crucified. And it's like there's a lack of like person like sitting down like me and you are. There's a big lack of that, and like
Well, and that's basically what society has evolved into at this point. And whether it's because of talk radio or cable TV shows, opinion shows, or just the internet and social media, where people, instead of just having thoughtful dialogue or thoughtful conversation, they they seem inclined to have to too often be nasty and confrontational, and that gets boring fast, and people get exhausted by confrontation and people saying, I don't agree with anything that you're talking about. I mean, that's non-productive. But if people can talk with each other and find common ground, that's the way progress can be made.
yeah, I do agree. But I don't know. I feel like how did you feel about this past local election? I forgot who ran for Democrat, but I know Jared Cram's Republican, right?
Right.
Um,
Well, he was challenged by Miles Burnett.
yes,
So Miles Burnett and Jared Cram ran against each other. Miles Burnett had never run for office before. So he put his name out there, and he ran, I thought, a very good campaign for somebody who had never run for office before. And what I gave both candidates a lot of credit for is they came on my radio program not once, but twice to debate the issues. We had one debate going back to last August, which was amazing. People were shocked. We actually set up a debate on the air on live radio. I can't remember who had the idea first, but within a matter of minutes on live radio, we said, okay, well then we'll do it on Thursday at 10 o'clock. So it was like they were in the studio in less than 48 hours to debate the issues last August.
Wow.
And then we had another debate closer to the election, I think a couple weeks before the election in October. So I'm fairly certain that the history, at least recent memory in Binghamton, the mayoral candidates have never been on a single radio or TV station for two debates before people voted. So I was very thankful for both Jared Cram and Miles Burnett agreeing to do that. And they didn't ask me to set up all sorts of specific rules. They didn't say they needed to know what topics or what questions were going to be talked about. They didn't say anything was off limits. They trusted me to ask the questions, and there was not like a timekeeper. It was three people in a room talking about the city of Binghamton. It was perfect. Well, as close to perfect as you can get to talk about the issues for Binghamton.
Yeah, and I don't know. I voted this election. I voted for Miles Burnett because I'm left wing, but I feel like this is just politics in general. There's a severe lack of third party voters. Like no one votes third party. And it's just like, it bothers me so much because it's like these alternatives, like for instance, like I voted SPUSA, Socialist Party, United States of America. And I'm probably one of like 10,000 people in the country that voted for SPUSA or even like Green Party. You know what I mean? It's like people talk about how they're like anti-capitalism and stuff like that. And you have these alternatives, but they're still voting for Democrat. Like that's going to change something. And like
But the way the system is set up, I mean, the system, not just in the last few decades, but over the years, has been set up, and not just in New York State, but generally across the country, to have these two main parties. And granted, they're the ones who have set up all the election rules, and that's why third party candidates are always, at least in the short term, always going to have trouble gaining traction because the rules, I mean, even to get ballot access in New York, they've made the rules more difficult than ever for third parties to gain access to the ballot because that's what the entrenched parties have wanted. The Democrats and Republicans have wanted to basically keep the game set up the way it always has been.
Well, the last party, I don't know the name of the party, I wasn't alive yet, but the last third party that like made some serious noise and it actually altered the election was Ross Perot. I think George Bush Sr. won because Ross Perot took those votes away from the Democratic Party.
Well, and that was a complicated case. I mean, Ross Perot had a lot of money. So, and that's the thing, regardless of political party in this country, it still comes down to money. Lots and lots of money. Republicans, Democrats, and then potential third-party candidates. Ross Perot was able to spend a lot of his own money for his campaign, and other, like even going forward in say for 2028, there could potentially be another candidate who's not currently being talked about who will run as something other than a Republican or Democrat, but that person is going to have either his or her own money or support from a billionaire or billionaires, because that's just how the system works in this country. I mean, you can't get your message out without a lot of money.
Do you see that happening in local politics as well? Like with like this past election, did you see that as well?
Well, money is always a factor. If you're well financed, if you have the ability to raise a lot of money, you can spend uh, a whole lot of money on advertising, whether it's broadcast advertising or these days online advertising. You can target potential voters if you have a lot of money. If you're trying to run a campaign without much money, I'm not going to say you can't win. The odds are stacked against you. The people who are most likely to be successful are the people who are going to have the greatest success at fundraising.
Yeah. And so let's wrap up. But I do have some questions for you from the viewers.
All right.
I had to write them down. First one. What is the future of local journalism in the next 5 years?
Not good
Why is that?
because of technology, because people don't want to pay for their news. People think that news ought to be free.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know of any legitimate reporters who work for free. So we have a serious problem, and it's not just local. This is national, and we could spend a whole future program just talking about the future of local news. But I don't know what's going to happen. The next 5 years don't look good for local reporting.
Okay. The next one is kind of connected to that. Are there any blogs, vlogs, podcasts already part of the 2025 local news landscape that you know of?
There are a handful. But they're uneven. And so I'm not going to recommend any by name. Some people are starting to do some things, and I have to say, if people are interested in their community and want to start trying to do legitimate reporting, you have the ability through podcasting or coming up with a YouTube channel, but you're going to have to work hard and show that you're dedicated to reporting the truth, that you are not setting up your podcast or YouTube channel or whatever organization simply to further your own agenda. If you want to attempt to do, say, balanced reporting, there's an opportunity out there. And that might be the best hope going forward in the next 5 years, that some people will get together and say, well, let's start to pick up where the traditional media no longer are able to report.
I know there's a guy actually locally. I don't know his name, but he reached out to me actually. He was one of the guys who wanted you on. He reached out to me, and he runs a local newsletter that he puts out, I think, weekly, like every Sunday.
Yeah.
Or like every Friday. He puts out a newsletter of
Yeah.
events going on.
And I'm encouraged by that. I actually spoke with him a few weeks ago. I ran into him while I was doing a story in Johnson City, and we had a good conversation. And so based on his interest in doing that sort of thing, that has a lot of potential. And I don't know how it's going to go. It's still in the early stages, but I offered him words of encouragement, because it will be people like him that are willing to spend some time and energy to report on things going on around the Triple Cities. And they'll make a difference. They have the potential to make a difference. There's no guarantee. But I am excited about his vision, and I'm encouraging him. I don't want to sound too negative. So anybody who's hearing this, don't feel that you shouldn't try. If you have an idea, whether it's a newsletter or a podcast or a YouTube channel, give it a shot. Give it a shot and do your best to get the word out to as many people.
Yeah. That is good advice, especially getting the word out there.
Absolutely.
I got a few silly ones here. Who is he? That was one of the questions.
Who is he?
Who is he?
You mean me?
Yep.
Just a a Binghamton native who loves the community and loves to report on the things that go on every day, the things that make us special, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. I enjoy reporting good news, but I also feel an obligation to report the bad news and the sad news and the tragic news. And I also love finding the unusual and introducing people in our area with their unique stories. And that's what I'm about. And I love that I think I have the best job in Binghamton. I really do.
Yeah. And I mean, I wish I was doing journalism stuff. I mean, like I said, my dad, um, I told him my dad, I told him that you were coming on. And he's like, really? He's like, you got Bob Joseph coming on? And I was like, yeah. I said I gave him a call and he decided to come on. And he was like, no way. He's like, that's where I get all my news from. And same with my girlfriend. My girlfriend says she gets all of her news from you as well. So I mean, it's a pretty big deal that you're coming on this podcast, and I appreciate you doing this.
Well, I'm glad to be able to offer some thoughts, and I'm just glad that after all these years, I still have the ability to be able to do this, because so few people have this opportunity in 2026 to be reporting on their hometown and also doing a daily talk show. I'm on the air 3 hours every weekday, and I'm able to talk with typically dozens of people over the course of a week, some familiar voices and some people that I'll never speak with again. It's really special.
The next question is, what is your Mount Rushmore of news stories that you've covered? That's a hard question.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pass on
Yeah,
that.
understandable.
That could also take up way too much time. We can revisit that in the future.
The next one is another silly one. Why don't they light the nice lights on 8617 through Endicott Vestal?
Because the municipalities are too cheap. Because electricity is expensive. The state puts in the lights, thousands and thousands of lights around New York. And then after they're installed on these highway projects, then in most cases, the municipalities are responsible for paying the electric bill. And let's face it, people driving on the highway don't vote. A lot of people passing through don't vote, so it doesn't translate into a big campaign issue. So it's just so expensive to keep all those lights on the highways energized.
The next question is, somebody says, why are you left wing? And claim to be balanced and fair, which is, I just tried to get every question that somebody asked.
That's a good question. I mean, people ask that on the air, probably, if not every day, maybe every other day. I don't think I fit a comfortable label or a standard label. I know what people think just based if they tune in on a given day, but a lot of my friends are actually surprised at my nuanced view on a lot of issues. So it's not quite what it seems, and a lot of people I think would be a bit surprised at my voting record. So, and the thing I've always pointed out, I've never been registered with a political party, and I don't intend to register with a political party. I view myself as very pragmatic, and I view every issue on its own merits. And actually, I view every candidate or elected official on their own merits. I mean, I have to say, one thing that people are surprised by is, as far as I know, I'm the only local reporter, talk show host who ever interviewed Donald Trump. So, and Donald Trump loved our conversation. We talked for nearly 20 minutes, and this is back when he was talking about running for governor of New York, so it's been a while. But Donald Trump, if he wants to come on the program and talk some more about speedies or anything else, he's welcome to, because we only scratched the surface. And he's welcome back, as well as J.D. Vance and anybody else, AOC. I don't care what their political persuasion is. I'm willing to chat with anybody at any time.
And this leads into my next question perfectly. I ask this everybody. This is the final question I got for you. I ask everybody that comes on the podcast, where is the best place for Speedies?
It's right here on East Main Street. Lupo's just over there where I'm pointing. We could run over there in about 60 seconds and get a Speedy, except I think they're closed today. My favorite place in recent years was S&S Char Pit in Binghamton on West State Street. Fortunately, they closed a few years ago. That was the only place where you could always get a lamb Speedy. You can't get a lamb Speedy now anywhere in Broome County on a regular basis, including at Lupo's here on Main Street in Endwell. But they do have really good pork and chicken Speedies, and for me, that's my go-to place.
Sounds good. All right, that was Bob Joseph, everybody. Thank you for listening.